Welcome back to my sewing mess. In this video, I'll show you how I make these eyeglass cases. There are 3 different sizes, small, medium, and large. In this video, we'll make the large one. And these ones do require bias binding for around the outside. They're super easy to make, a lot of fun. These glasses are fairly large, and they still fit in the smallest size just fine. But they also fit good in the medium size. All you need is fabric for the inside, fabric for the outside, some bias binding, and some batting. This is just some thin quilt batting that I have left over, and I'm going to use that. You can either buy bias binding. I had this stuff left over, so I'm using it, but you can also make your own bias binding, and you can use whatever cute fabric you want that way. I have a pattern and written tutorial that is available in my Etsy shop. I'll put the link below. And included with that pattern is instructions to make your own bias binding. So if you want to make it yourself, it's all included in there. Okay, so let's get started. So my pattern for the large eyeglass case is 7.5 by 8 inches. I'm going to cut my fabric 1/2 inch larger in both directions because when I quilt it, it can shift a little bit or shrink, so I want to make sure I have plenty of fabric on there. So I'm going to cut this one by 8.5 by 8 inches. Okay, so when I lay the pattern on there, it should be slightly larger, which it is. Perfect. Okay, now I'll cut out my liner, or my inside fabric. Alright, so here's my liner fabric. I'm cutting it the same size, 8.5 by 8 inches. And here's my batting. I'll cut that the same size as well, 8.5 by 8 inches. Looks like I kind of cut it wrong, so there's a little chunk right there, but we'll make it work. Okay, so now I have my outside fabric, and I'm marking my quilting lines, going from one corner to the next. I have a quilting guide on my machine, so all I need to do is mark one line in each direction. I'm just going to do a basic 1-inch square pattern on the diagonal. Okay, lay out your liner fabric so the right side is down. Then put the batting on top of that liner fabric. Make sure everything's lined up nicely at the edges. See, this corner right here that I accidentally cut off will be out of the way. Now I'll put the outside fabric on. It would help if I ironed it, but I'm lazy like that. So I'm just going to stick it on there. And line it up nicely. You can pin it or clamp it. I love these little clamps. I've gotten poked a whole lot less since I started using these. Maybe I'll clamp it away from that line because I'm going to sew across here first. Okay, now I can take it to my machine and sew my quilting lines, and I'll just do them 1 inch apart, all the way across that way, all the way across that way. Now that I have my fabric all quilted, I lay my pattern piece on top and make sure that you have it going the right way, right? It's not going to be enough room if I go that way. And that piece of batting that I had missing is right there in the corner, so it will get cut off. I'm just going to lay this on here nice and square. Make sure that there's fabric on all the sides. So this one, the liner is under there a ways, so I want to make sure I scoot this all the way over to the opposite end so I don't miss anything. Okay, that looks pretty good. I like to use a ruler because it's more rigid and easy to cut along. I'll line that up with 2 of the sides and just cut around it. Try not to move it. As I turn it, make sure it's still lined up nicely on the edges. But of course, I still need to cut the corners. First, I'll do this straight one over here. Alright, now I just gotta cut around these rounded corners. You could also use scissors on these corners if you'd rather. Okay. Now we have our piece all cut out. For the binding on the large one, you want about at least 22 inches. I just used my full piece and cut it off at the end. So with this extra wide double fold bias binding that you can buy, you unfold it, and you're going to line up one edge with this edge up here. You want to start on this slanted corner and make sure that your binding is going to stick out at least 1/4 of an inch to give yourself room. You don't want it to be too short. And then you just line it up on that edge and pin or clamp it into place. And we'll go up to this corner here. And you want to make sure you do this on the outside, not on this other side. Then I'll go across this top edge. And then I'll go around this corner. And you don't want to sew it down any farther than the corner. Just go around the corner and it'll stop right here, because we're going to fold it, and when you sew it down, you'll sew across all these layers. For now, I'll sew right along this first fold here. It's close to 1/4 inch, probably a little bit bigger, but I'll just sew across there. If you're using the other binding that you make, just sew it 1/4 of an inch from the edge. We'll go all the way around to there and stop. Okay, once I'm done around that corner, I backstitch a little bit and take it off. Now that I have my binding sewn across the top, I need to take it to the other side. So make sure that the first fold is folded over. You bring that over top to the other side. When you bring it over to this side, you can see the stitch line from where you sewed it on the other side. So you want to bring this down just a little bit past that. When you sew, you want to sew close to the edge, and you want your stitches to kind of end up just a little bit beyond that stitch line. So I'll clamp it here. I don't need to go around this corner yet. I'm just going to clamp it right here to make sure it's far enough over. Now I'm going to sew just over this little curve right here, and I'll stop probably right about here, a little more than halfway, because when you fold this over to sew it, you're going to need to be able to sew this side down, so you don't want it to be too far over here. It'll make it too hard. So I sewed it right about here, just after it will fold, because I can get my machine in there and sew on that side later on. So I'll get it over to there, and then we'll sew this other side on, then we'll flip it over the rest of the way. So now I'll just stitch along here to about there. You can mark it if you want. So it's a little bit over halfway, which would be about 4.5 inches over here. you can see that I sewed really close to the edge, and over here you'll see that stitch line just down past the bias binding, and that looks pretty good. I stopped stitching right there, so when I fold this over, I'm not going to see my back stitching on this side. It'll be hidden back there, and I can still get my machine in there and sew on that side later on. Unfortunately, I was not recording, but I cut this end off. You can either put a ruler on there and cut it straight across so it's straight and even with the rest of the edge, or I just took my scissors and I snipped it off. You don't want it to be cut too far in or out. Right, next step, I'm going to fold this over and line up the edges. I'm going to go ahead and clamp that. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew this down all the way around this side and that side. Might as well just hold it in place, and then it'll make it less of a hassle when I'm sewing my binding down. Okay, I just sewed this edge and that edge. I did it nice and close to the edge because I don't want the stitching to show at all. Now I can flip it back over here and continue this original sewing that we were doing over here. So I'll keep lining this bias binding up with the edge and clamp it in place. And I'll clamp it around the corner. I'm not going to do it very nicely because I'm just going to adjust it as I sew. Okay, for the end, snip it off so you have at least half of an inch. A little bit more is okay. Go right about there. When you come down here, you'll fold it over, and so when you sew across, you'll just sew right across here, and that will tack that down around the corner, around the edge. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and sew all the way down around the end, continuing the stitch line. So make sure you start off over here. Alright, now I need to bring this binding over to the front, just like I did up here. So you want that first fold to stay folded. Just bring it over all the way around. Make sure that all the raw edges are tucked in, nice and flat. You can pull this over and pin or clamp it. The corners may be a little bit trickier, but that's why we have the bias binding. It can stretch and curve around the corners. I'm just going to tack it down with these, and I'll adjust it as I sew. I still like to have mine come a little bit past that stitch line, so when I sew close to the edge it will look nice on the other side too. Now when you get to this bottom piece here, unfold it all the way. Keep it folded this way. Then you'll fold it back. And fold it over like that. Let me just get this corner tacked down. Now, if you don't like it, you can redo it. I can see this edge sticking out right here, so I'm going to try to fold this a little bit better. I might pull it in more. Make sure it covers up this edge right here too. Don't want that showing. You just kind of got to work with it a few times until you get what you want. I pulled it in too far. I want this to stick and cover up that edge right there. There we go. Look at that. Looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Let's sew that down. So now I'm going to start sewing up here where I left off. Continue around all the way to that end. Alright, I'm just going to trim off my extra thread ends. That looks pretty good. I got my stitching nice and close to the edge all the way around. The back stitched right there. This side, it kind of sewed on top of the binding in some spots, off in others. That's okay. Doesn't really matter, but sometimes it's nice to have it consistent. Okay, and there's my eyeglass case. That's the large one. Then there's the medium. And the small. Here's the small, medium, and large. The pattern is available in my Etsy shop. The link is below. Feel free to like and subscribe for more of my crafting videos. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy sewing some of these yourselves.